Alright, so this video I'm going to talk about why I hate ground fighting. This has been inspired by someone who just gave me a call, and I just listened to the voicemail, and it's like almost 3 in the morning right now, and it just motivated me to make this video. First, this person said that he practiced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 15 years, and he's thinking about joining my school, and he wants to basically see what I'm about. I don't know what he means by that, but it might be a challenge, which is fine. But he said it in a very respectful way. I'm gonna give him back a call and tell him to come over here, and maybe we could do some sparring, whatever the case may be. I do definitely want to get it filmed and put it out there. But I'm gonna give him a call. But basically, it made me want to make this video, and it just got me thinking about a lot of things. This video is not intended to be disrespectful in any way. I know I made some very disrespectful videos in the past, but let's forget about that. Let's think about right now. I'm older, I'm wiser, I'm more respectful, and I just want to share my ideas. Just because I hate ground fighting doesn't mean I'm incapable of ground fighting. I know I'm very capable. I feel that if I really wanted to, I could be one of the best wrestlers in the world if I wanted to. Just pound for pound, I feel I'm very strong, and I'm very fast, and I'm good at what I do. Doesn't mean that I'm not capable at it. It's just that I don't like it, for various reasons. For ground fighting, to me, it's very dirty, and I don't like to be dirty. I like to be clean. Stand-up fighting to me is much cleaner than ground fighting. And I was gonna make a video. I'll probably make it later on, but I was gonna title the video McGregor versus Gracie. I hate the UFC. I can't stand the UFC. But if I had to choose, I don't care about McGregor. I really hate McGregor. But as far as compared to Royce Gracie, from what I know about McGregor and what I know about Royce Gracie, I would much rather choose McGregor over Gracie. As far as him representing stand-up fighting and then compared to ground fighting, I really feel that ground fighting should be completely eliminated from combat sport completely. Other than college wrestling, professional wrestling, that's fine, whatever. It's not my cup of tea, but it shouldn't go anything beyond that. To me, if you're a ground fighter, no matter if you do BJJ or MMA, I feel that you should just prove your worth, prove your skill, prove your excellency in just pure wrestling, college wrestling, Olympic wrestling. That more than enough proves your ground fighting abilities. You don't need to pound somebody until submission or whatever the case may be. Pound somebody until the referee stops you from pounding them anymore. Even in the kids class, I would have them wrestle, get hands-on and be able to see who could pin somebody down for 3 seconds. It comes very natural for them. Everybody in here, all the kids in here, they all know how to wrestle. It's just very natural. But very few kids will be able to know how to stand up fight. It doesn't come natural to them. Not at all. It takes years and years and years of development and discipline to be able to be a very proficient stand-up fighter. But to be a wrestler, to be a ground fighter, it doesn't take much training or effort, to be proficient in that. What I say, there's a saying that some people say, all fights land on the ground or end up on the ground. That's a completely false statement. Completely false. Because there's gunfights out there all the time, and those are a lot of instances that don't end up on the ground. as far as fighting is concerned. He ends up in the ground when you're dead already. So that happens all the time, gunfights out there. In addition to other weapons that are being used, such as knives and sticks and batons and swords or whatever that you find out there. In addition, every single boxing match that ever is conducted doesn't ever end up on the ground. Never. Because the rules of boxing are designed to eliminate the ground fighting. So if you want to be a boxer, then ground fighting is absolutely unnecessary. You could completely do away with the entire thing, never have anything to do with it, and you could be very successful as a boxer. So that's clearly another instance where the fight did not end up on the ground. Mayweather and McGregor, they just fought recently. It did not end up on the ground at all. Never. Okay? If you're a kickboxer, by kickboxing rules, it will never end up on the ground because it goes against the rules of kickboxing. If you're a Thai boxer, it'll never end up on the ground because it goes against the rules of Thai boxing. If you practice Taekwondo and you do Olympic Taekwondo sparring, it'll never end up on the ground because it goes against the rules of Taekwondo. So those are all instances where a fight never ends up on the ground. And I've sparred in here, probably over 100 times. I sparred in here a lot. And throughout my life, I've sparred. Very rarely does it ever end up on the ground. I mean, sometimes it ends up on the ground, but rarely. Like I'd say less than 90% or less than 10% of all the sparring that I do ends up on the ground. And when it does end up on the ground, usually 95% of the time, I'm okay. Like, I have no problems, no issues being down there and working my way out to get back up. So what I'm saying is that statement right there, all fights end up on the ground, is never true. Now, if I make the other statement, that all fights start standing up, then that's a true statement. I don't see any fight that starts on the ground. None. Even in pro wrestling, they start standing up. They don't start on the ground. Even college wrestling, for the most part, it starts standing up. Even MMA, cage fighting, starts standing up. Boxing starts standing up. Even football, NFL, standing up. So imagine if NFL players started laying on the ground. No, they always start standing up. And then they stand up, somebody gets tackled, okay, they stand up again. Every single sport out there starts standing up. Everything. Track and field starts standing up. Even swimming, it starts standing up. All forms of running start standing up. Tennis starts standing up. Everything starts standing up. Okay, so if all fights start standing up, then the logical conclusion is that if you perfect your art standing up, then you'll never have to ground fight for your entire life. If you perfect the art of standing up. If you perfect the art of stand-up fighting, you'll never have to worry about the ground. Never. So that in itself, the stand-up fighting requires a lifetime of training and development towards perfection. It requires a lifetime. Because part of stand-up fighting, as far as street fighting is concerned, is being able to prevent the ground fighter from taking you down to the ground. So, there's an immense amount of preventative measures. Just recently, I'll try to make a video of this next time, where somebody showed me a fight that happened at Bellator. It wasn't the UFC, but it was Bellator. Somebody was trying to take somebody down to the ground, and then he got kneed on the skull, and then it busted his skull, like it just smashed it. The dude went down immediately. So that's an example. Was stand-up fighter against a ground fighter. A ground fighter tried to take him down. His skull got smashed open. In many instances, you could conduct it yourself. It doesn't have to be watching these cage fighters, but try to spar with people that love ground fighting. And the better that you get at stand-up fighting, the harder it will be for them to take you down to the ground, to the point where they're gonna end up giving up because they can't withstand the damage that's being sustained any longer. Being kicked in the face, being kneed in the face, being clawed in the face, whatever, kicked in the groin area, kicked in the kneecap, just completely demolished, standing up, to the point where they can't take it anymore. They just give up because they can't. Because the better that you get standing up and defending yourself, the harder it is for the ground fighter to take you down. Now, he may eventually take you down, but that still doesn't mean that he's gonna win the fight. Because there's a lot of things that you could do at that moment to get your to get your ass back on your feet again. So what I'm saying is that every single ground fighter has something to learn from the stand-up fighter. Every single one of them. But it's up to their discretion. Just like it's like saying every single bodybuilder has something to learn from a stand-up fighter. And they do. Every single powerlifter has something to learn from a stand-up fighter. And they do. But if they choose to stay in their realm, like a wrestler, if all he does is want to wrestle and nothing else, his goal is to win the Olympics in wrestling, he doesn't have to learn stand-up fighting because he chooses not to. Okay? Similar to a boxer who just wants to box for his whole life. He doesn't have to learn ground fighting. He doesn't have to, because that's not a part of their game. A bodybuilder, he doesn't have to learn stand-up fighting if he just wants to stay in the world of bodybuilding. But, he can lift as much weights as he wants, be as strong as he wants, but he's going to get whooped up by a stand-up fighter if he ever got in a real fight, because he's stepping into a realm he has absolutely no clue in what he's doing. So, but every single ground fighter can learn a lot from a stand-up fighter. Now, not every single stand-up fighter can learn from a ground fighter. If you want to be a boxer, you don't need to worry about stand-up fighting, or not. If you want to be a boxer, you don't need to worry about ground fighting. Said that wrong. Okay. If you want to be a kickboxer, you don't have to learn about ground fighting. If you want to be a football player, you don't need to learn about ground fighting. If you want to be a Thai boxer, you don't need to learn about ground fighting. The only things where ground fighting is relevant as of today in a sporting context is the cage. If you want to go into the cage, then yeah, you better learn some ground fighting, because that's a big part of what they do. That's what they're known for. The rules of the cage are pretty much favoring the ground fighter. So you better know ground fighting if you want to go in the cage. But it's becoming less relevant, because back then, the Royce Gracies were owning the cage, because that was their element. The whole reason why there is cage fighting is because of the Gracies, you know. Um, but it's becoming less relevant now because they figured it out. They figured out how to counter the ground fighters, how to make them much less effective than they were in the past. Because a lot of the stand-up fighters back then didn't know how to integrate. They didn't know how to counter the ground fighters within the context of the cage fighting because it was something new to them. There was never any mainstream combative sport that integrated ground fighting the way that the cage did. But now that it's become more mainstream and a lot more people have been practicing and getting used to these rules of the cage, the pure ground fighter that enters into the cage pretty much almost has no chance anymore. Because if you know nothing but ground fighting and you step into that cage now, you're going to get destroyed by the people that are really good at stand-up fighting. Like a McGregor, even though I hate the dude or dislike him, but from what I've heard, the only losses that he had was when he was taken down to the ground. So obviously, he's more of a stand-up fighter than a ground fighter. But at the same time, he's considered one of the best, so-called best, even though he's not the best. But whatever. But anyway, if he's the most popular and he's getting destroyed, or he's destroying people that are ground fighters in the cage, that says a lot, right? Even Ronda Rousey was more considered a ground fighter. She was getting completely demolished by people that were amateurs in stand-up fighting. Imagine what would have happened to her against people who are professionals in stand-up fighting. She might not even be living right now because one hit could kill her, you know. So even ground fighting is becoming even less relevant in cage fighting. So basically, the better that these cage fighters get at stand-up fighting, the less relevant ground fighting will be, even in the cage. Because, as I stated, every single fight starts standing up. So if you perfect the art of stand-up fighting, you will never have to fight on the ground in your entire life. But people are not perfectionists. It's impossible. So there will be times when a ground fighter will be able to take you down to the ground. But like I said, that's fine. Just because they took you down to the ground doesn't mean that you're going to lose. You know, you just have to find your way back, you know, to get back up. Or to just end the fight down there, which is fine. You know, so even in the cage, ground fighting is being less relevant. So where else is ground fighting important? You know, well, there only ends up becoming wrestling, and that's it. There's really nothing else where ground fighting is necessary. You know, you want to be a gymnast, you don't need nothing to do with no ground fighting. Bodybuilder, nothing to do with ground fighting. Powerlifting, nothing to do with ground fighting. Now, on the streets, that's an aspect of training that's necessary. But it's a small aspect, as I stated, because every single fight starts standing up on the streets. If you learn to perfect the art of the stand-up fighting, you won't have to worry at all about the ground fighting. If you have your gun with you everywhere you go, you take care of the confrontation with your gun every single time, you don't gotta worry about no ground fighting. Or even if you carry your knife with you everywhere you go, you perfect the art of knife fighting, you don't never gotta worry about ground fighting ever. You know, but for those few times that a ground fighter does take you down to the ground, you definitely need to know how to survive that. And you definitely need to learn how to counter that. So, even in the cage, ground fighting is becoming less relevant. Now, I say that if you're gonna learn ground fighting, you better learn it the right way. And the right way is not wrestling, and the right way is not Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The right way is survival ground fighting, which is a part of what I teach. Basically, absolutely no rules at all on the ground. Do whatever it takes to live. Do whatever it takes to take them out. Absolutely no rules. That's the type of ground fighting that I promote. Because it's for survival. So I teach survival. I don't teach people to be ignorant on what to do when they're on the ground. I teach people to survive when they're on the ground. So if that means taking out your gun and shooting the person, then that's what you're gonna do. If it means taking your knife out and stabbing the person, then that's what you're gonna do. If it means choking them to death, that's what you're gonna do. If it means biting them, that's what you're gonna do. If it means blinding them by eye gouging them, that's what you're gonna do. So even in Bruce Lee's movies, 99% of the time he's doing stand-up fighting. For the few times that they took him down to the ground, he did end up biting the person, or choking the person to death. And that's kind of what I teach. My teachings are an extension of Bruce Lee's teachings. So Bruce Lee was a stand-up martial artist, stand-up fighter, whatever you want to call him. But it didn't mean that he was incapable of ground fighting. He was very capable. But he knew, as I know, that if you perfect the art of stand-up fighting, you'll never have to worry about ground fighting. Okay? And even before he died, what he was studying before he died was fencing. So he was slowly getting into perfecting the art of unarmed combat, standing, and then eventually perfecting the art of unarmed combat with a weapon, in this case a sword. So if you are a perfect swordsman, you'll never have to worry about ground fighting in your life, because you would beat them with the sword every single time. And if they happen to take the sword away from you, then you will beat them standing up every single time. And even today, if you put all your energies into stand-up fighting, you'll be more successful in life than you ever will be putting your energies in ground fighting. Because as a stand-up fighter, you could be potentially one of the richest athletes in the world, as Mayweather is. He doesn't know anything about ground fighting, but he's the richest athlete that has ever lived. He made $300 million in his last fight. In excess of $300 million. And he doesn't know anything about ground fighting. It was very clear that he will get choked out if he goes on the ground. But it doesn't matter. He's the richest athlete in the entire world. And he hires bodyguards to surround him everywhere he goes. He didn't have to worry about no ground fighting for the rest of his life. Richest athlete ever. If you want to be a Hollywood actor, and you want to be in an action movie, and you want to do choreographed fights in a Hollywood movie, you don't have to know anything about ground fighting, and you're completely fine. If you want to be a football player, you don't have to know anything. Make millions of dollars in the NFL, you don't have to know anything about ground fighting. You want to be a basketball player in the NBA, you don't have to know anything about ground fighting. Ground fighting is becoming less and less relevant that back in the days of the cage, those days are gone. People aren't even talking about the Gracies anymore. That was just temporary. As soon as these stand-up fighters learned the ground and how to counter the ground, it became less relevant. And I already knew before, before the masses knew what was going to happen. Because stand-up fighting is, that's the key right there. Martial arts, you train in everything. Everything you gotta train in. And that includes the ground fighting. But it's something that we could definitely do without. It's something that I highly discourage. It's just something that's not necessary. Because when it comes to real survival ground fighting, it's very messy, it's dirty, and it's not pretty. It's not something that we should ever be entertained by. I said that when it comes to entertainment, fighting to entertain others, we could completely do away with the ground fighting. Just get rid of it completely. This is not for entertainment, this is for survival. That's how I feel about the ground fighting. It's not good for society. Not as a form of entertainment, not as something to be competitive, not for something to be competitive about. It's just something to know, to learn, to survive. And I really highly discourage the things associated with it, as far as the cauliflower ears and the ringworm and the exchange of bacteria and just all these bodily fluids and skin to skin contact, all this sweat on sweat, and I highly discourage that. It's not healthy for you. But yeah, that's pretty much, that's how I feel about it. And another thing is, how could you practice ground fighting without doing it with somebody else? Martial arts, stand-up fighting, you don't always need a partner. You can do a lot without a partner. You can hit the punching bag, you can work the wooden dummy, you can practice forms or what people say, katas, shadow boxing, focus mitts, working with focus mitts. There's a lot of things you could do, practice, weapons, without a partner. You could be completely by yourself. You could practice martial arts by yourself for 20 years and you'll be fine. But ground fighting, how are you going to practice ground fighting without somebody to ground fight with? You can't. So it makes you dependent on having a training partner, and that's not good. It's not. I recommend people to learn it as a tool of survival, but to not get overly engrossed in it, overly focused on it, and forget about all the other elements of combat that have nothing to do with the ground. That's just a small element of the entirety. But if that's what you like, that's what you want to do, hey, all to you, but this is just my preference, my opinion. I love practicing martial arts as a whole. Um, I don't like focusing on just that one element and that's it. I like practicing nunchucks, but I don't do that every single day and that's all I do and nothing else. I do a little bit of everything. And we're gonna gravitate towards what we like. And I love the stand-up fighting aspect. So I focus majority of my time on that. Doesn't mean I'm not capable on the ground. I'm more than capable. But that's the thing about ground fighting is just it's like you can't improve upon yourself unless you have somebody else to challenge you in that element. And that creates dependency. And that's not good. It's like only wanting to arm wrestle, but never wanting to do calisthenics, never wanting to lift weights on your own. That's not good. That's not a good development where you're completely dependent on another person, to enhance your development. And, being my size, my height, my weight, I want to remain standing when I engage in any confrontation. It just works more towards my benefit. So I'm always going to be this way. I'm not going to change because this is who I am. And because I run a school, this is what I'm going to teach. Is I'm always going to promote people to stand up and fight. And to not be consumed with the ground fighting. To know it, but not be consumed by it. This is what I practice. This is what I teach. And I'm going to make that very clear. But yeah, that's what I want to say. And everybody has their likes and dislikes. But maybe just when I was real little, maybe 9 years old or younger, I remember I did used to like at one time like the WWF. But never again. I grew out of that phase of my life. And everybody has their likes and dislikes. But there's no turning back for me. I'm not going back to how I used to be as a little child, being fascinated by WWF. I stepped into the world of the martial arts, and there's no turning back. Now I train in everything. Everything's important for me. I can't just focus in one little area and that's it. That's not me. And ultimately, I train people to get to the point of the art of fighting without fighting. Being so capable in fighting that you just don't want to fight because you know what you're capable of. That's like a person that has a gun on them at all times and they know what they can do and they don't want to ever have to use the gun if they don't have to. That's what I want to train to be. And the ground fighting, I'm glad the craze is over. And it is seen for what it is. But yeah, I've always been gravitated towards Bruce's teachings, Bruce Lee. And I want to reignite the people's interest and love towards his way and towards the entirety of the martial arts, which will include the spirituality, which will include the meditation. A little bit of the ground fighting, but there's so much more than just that. And that's ultimately what I want, for the people to gravitate towards. Because it is the spiritual element combined with the entire practice of the martial arts in its entirety that's going to really help improve people's lives and bring them happiness and inner peace and compassion and love. But that's all I wanted to say. And hopefully people understand where I'm coming from. But if not, that's fine too. If you want to be a ground fighter, you want to be a wrestler, you have that freedom, you have that right, you can do whatever the hell you want to do. I'm not forcing people to watch my videos, and it doesn't really matter to me, but I'm going to stay who I am, and I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, I have that right as well. So, good luck to you in your journey.